All right, welcome back. It's time to dig in. We're going to start with the UCI, and here is our scope of work. On our TSC's UCI, and maybe we should even start right there, because there's two acronyms right off the back. What is a TSC and what is a UCI? In Q-SYS world, we have hardware and we have software. The software is the user control interface, the UCI. And the UCI can be run on, well, a number of different pieces of hardware. It could run on a web browser. It could run on an app on a tablet, but it also can run on a dedicated piece of hardware called a TSC, a touch screen controller. So that's what we mean. So what do we want on our UCI? We want always to be able to adjust the audio levels. You should always want to be able to hit a mute button. Okay, so we want overall audio output level control always visible with visual feedback. It's actually a piece of cake. Okay, we also want there to be 3 primary control pages. And I'm saying pages because I'm going to have a conversation with you after this slide. But pages with the client's CSS style applied. What are those 3 pages? There's going to be the room controls. That's where we're going to have the lights and the shades. The lights are going to have fader control of the dimming system, including 4 presets. The shades are going to need to go up and down, and you got it, stop. Additionally, we are going to have another page called display controls where we're going to have joint control of the display's powers. We're going to be able to have one button that turns on both TVs. Additionally, we want to have individual video routing for each display, and we'll probably figure out some appropriate automations to go along with that, but we'll get there. All right, and then lastly, the third page is the camera's control page, which is going to have the camera preview window, the PTZ controls with camera selection, and additionally, those press and hold presets that we were mentioning to start off with. We're going to make all that happen as well.
Now this should look really familiar to them if you've taken either of the previous 2 classes. This is, again, the same scope of work for fundamentals and intermediate. So if this is sounding really familiar, maybe put this video on double speed, or maybe jump to the next one. We're going to build out the real basics of the UCI here. And if this is your first time going through this, then stick around. We're going to build out the skeleton of this thing.
Yep, stick with us. Let's take a moment to talk about pages, okay? Because we said that it was a thing. And the reality is that pages are a thing in Q-SYS in regards to TSCs, but it's kind of a legacy approach. And think about it, right? If you go back into the Wayback Machine, it used to be that like the only way to interface with a control system was via its piece of glass in the room. And if you wanted to have like these audio buttons that we talked about needed to always be visible, if you needed it on 3 different pages, you would have to build and place those buttons 3 separate times. Whereas, if you use the layers approach, and first of all, what is the layers approach? You can see it here on the right side of the page. The layers approach takes the idea of different panes of glass. It's sort of the old school cellular animation. If you're an old guy like me and you saw how they made Snow White back in the day, I saw a documentary, okay? I'm not actually that old.
I mean, you can be both. You're allowed to be both old and have seen a documentary.
Thanks, you're older than me, Nate. Like the old school cellular animation process of like overlaying these different cells to get the different controls on the page. That's actually what we have going on here. And in fact, we call it the Z layer order. And that should be very familiar language, especially if you guys have any familiarity with graphic design. So Nate, actually, one of the things I really love about the layers approach is that the UCI can get served to any number of pieces of glass, right? We talked about it. You've got your web browser, you've got your tablet app or iPhone app, you've got your access through Designer itself, etc. The beauty of this if you are working for IT or if you are AV and you're trying to sell managed services, through the power of Reflect, you're able to, this is even just in Core Manager as well, if you're on premises, you're able to look into that UCI and see what is it doing. And so when somebody's like, I need help, you can actually see what the touchscreen is doing, and you can provide remote support and help them. It's beautiful. It's wonderful.
Now, that doesn't mean that there's never a use for Pages. The way that I like to describe Pages too is that if you're going to use the same UCI and deploy it to multiple touchscreens intentionally, then Pages might be the right path to go, because that way each person who's navigating those touchscreens is in control of their own page, whichever one they look at, because it's not a global change when you move the pages. This could be useful for things like informational kiosks or something like that. But if you're ever building a UCI that is just a one-off, like we are here, this UCI will only exist for this one touch panel in this room that is specific to this room, layers are for sure the way to go. Like when Jeff said that we know which layer we're on, we're talking specifically about someone who's looking in via Reflect, who is looking at that UCI. They can see which layer is visible or not. We do know, we can get the information from a specific touchscreen which page is currently being displayed, but it's not quite the same troubleshooting effects that we have to Reflect to try to look at a specific touch panel if you're using the page method.
What we are going to do is we are going to implement a UCI that makes use of the layers methodology. And in fact, here is our game plan. We are going to first add a UCI, and we're going to configure it to match the TSC that we're going to use. And then our UCI is going to have the 3 layers, okay? Not pages, layers. We're going to implement layers. Obviously, we're going to need rooms, we need displays, we need cameras, and we're going to put a header on each of these layers so we know which one we're looking at. So first thing we're going to do, and you can follow along with me right here, is we're going to come over to the left pane, and what we want to do is we want to add the new user control interface and click the plus button. And notice that you get a new one. It's called Interface 1, which is fine. It's a unique name, but we're going to do better. In fact, we're going to take a second and we're going to talk about making sure that we have good names. One of the most important things, Nate, about working as a programmer, whether you are working in a team or whether it's just yourself, is the idea of having a nomenclature, the idea of having a naming system. It's really important that you decide what you want to name things, and then you do it as consistently as possible. Now, I say as consistently as possible because I know what it's like to make rules for myself and then be like, it's fine, I'll break them. But I kind of want you to think about it this way. So if you already work in an organization that has a style guide, work within that style guide, but not today, okay? For the purposes of this class, I want you to follow along with me because, well, I'm not there. I'm not there to help you debug and fix the things that you are invariably going to break. But if you name things exactly the way that I name things today, then you can hit pause, you can rewind, you can sort of help pull yourself out of the ditch. In the real world, though, get with your organization and come up with a style guide. But it's just me, Jeff. It's just me at home. It's great. Get with yourself, call a committee meeting, and make a style guide that you're going to stick to. Because think about it. At some point, Nate, have you ever had to stand in the closet at 2 o'clock in the morning to fix a system?
That sentence was really, really weird until you added to fix a system. So, I'm just gonna say no to that one.
Well, your day's coming. At some point, you're going to have to go stand in a closet at 2 o'clock in the morning and fix a system. So do yourself the favor of naming things consistently, but more importantly, naming things well, naming things where they make sense. So Interface 1 is kind of okay.
I think what you're implying there is that you should name it in such a way that the next person who isn't you, who's looking at the file, can find the things naturally, right?
Well, it's mostly.
Or maybe it's you as well, but it's like 2 years later and you're like, what was I doing?
It's exactly right.
Yeah.
Sometimes the poor soul you're helping is yourself. Okay, so do yourself the favor of giving it a good name.
But you can't give, if you're going to give it a good name, that's going to be a problem because you can't name everything Nate. Everything in the whole design would be called Nate.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
wouldn't that be a problematic?
It would,
Yeah.
Nate. So let's give our UCI a good name. Over here, we have named it Class UCI. And underneath that, we've got a couple of more properties that we need to talk through. First is style. Off the bat, it's none. And that's not an insult. It just means that we haven't applied a style sheet. And guess what? We're not ready to apply one. So we're going to leave that one on none for the moment. Now, this next one actually is important for us at this juncture. By default, it came out as a TSC 80-G2. In the dropdown, it actually gives us several options. Now, you may or may not remember which one you should choose. If you don't remember, come over here to inventory and look through the list and you'll see, oh yeah, I have a TSC 70G3. So when I come back to my UCI, I will pick TSC 70G3. Now, why is that important? It's important because remember how I described it. We have software that runs on hardware. Each of those pieces of hardware come with their own aspect ratios. Since we intend to run this UCI on a TSC 70G3, we're going to make sure that those match.
If you get it wrong, you'll notice what happens is that when you try to deploy that UCI to that touchscreen, the scale is going to be wrong, or it's going to put bars on the top or the bottom because it doesn't match properly. So it won't break the system, but it's not going to look right. So make sure you're working with the right thing to start off with.
Yep, make them match. Orientation, all right, obviously landscape, horizontal, or portrait. We're going to do landscape. Private is a setting that's all about whether you want this UCI to show up in a list. We're going to leave ours set to no. And then the enable button swipe, we're also going to leave ours set to no. That's more of a, do you want to enable basically where you can like just run your finger and anything your finger touches will activate the control. You could. We're not. I don't think it makes sense on our UCI. So we're going to leave it set to no. All right, that concludes this video. We'll see you in the next one.